Hi, I'd like to welcome you to this issue of Transform HR on Demand. My name is Alyssa DeVere. I'm an executive strategy partner with PeopleDoc, and Transform HR on Demand are these type of very casual videos that we shoot with extremely cool people who are seriously transforming the HR community and operations. And today we have a really interesting guest. I'm really looking forward to getting right into it. So by quick introduction, I'm pleased to introduce you to Don Dowling, Jr. He is with an international employment partner with White & Case. And for over almost 3 decades, I believe, Don, you've been working there at the firm. It's an award-winning law firm with international offices, 39 offices, 26 countries. It's amazing. And Don specifically leads a team of lawyers focused exclusively on outbound international employment law and works with multinational clients, advising them on a variety of things, including global codes of conduct, HR policies, benefit offerings, global HR information systems, data privacy, employment issues, particularly in global M&A deals, language laws, and much more. So, Don, gosh, we are just so grateful that you could join us today.
Well, Alyssa, thanks so much. This is a great opportunity, and I'm very happy to talk to you, and PeopleDoc's a great group to be doing something for, so this is exciting.
Oh, awesome. So, I know how incredibly ever-changing this area of legal work is in the international realm within HR. But today we're going to focus very specifically on an area that obviously is close to my heart and the rest of PeopleDoc, which is electronic documents and how they are used, and more importantly, how they should be used.
Okay.
Distributed multinational organizations. So your last, most recent newsletter had a great article, and it had this quote in it that I want to kind of kick off this whole topic with and have you comment on. And that quote was this. You said, high technology, paperless HR documentation systems are pulling out ahead of slowly evolving legal doctrines. So maybe you can just comment what you meant by that and what that is intended to kind of spur today's discussion.
Okay, thanks, Alyssa. Yes, we're talking in the context of a global or a multinational company, and especially its internal HR documents, right? And how it keeps track of its people, dates of hire, performance evaluations, payroll, even tracking travel and benefits and all that stuff. In the old days, companies were more local, and you might have one company, let's say a dry cleaners or a restaurant, and they might have the personnel files in the back office somewhere. But when you're dealing with a multinational, all of a sudden there's a need for people all around the operation, both, let's say, at headquarters versus a local office, to be looking at certain information about certain employees. Let's say they're doing some kind of succession planning and wanting to look at the performance evaluations of some of their executives. That might be driven from headquarters. And all of a sudden the back office hard copy file of personnel documents is no longer very practical, is it? But legally, it's a different issue. And this has always been true, that technology in all different areas pulls out ahead of the law, and lawyers are always talking about the legal applications for some new problem. But in this case, if you think about it, think about signing documents and certainly things like an employment contract or a non-compete or a severance release or enrollment forms on your tax on whether you're taking certain deductions. Those all have legal significance. And legally, the laws have just been assuming people are signing things with paper, and later, if you need to prove whether or not someone agreed, you pull out the paper. In some cases, you need notaries. We in America are actually coming from a fairly casual culture in this. If you look at civil law countries like Mexico and pretty much all of continental Europe and Latin America and big parts of Asia, their systems are even more formalistic. And for example, a notary public, whose job is to authenticate documents, in Mexico and some of these other countries is a very exalted position. I once knew a lawyer who was at a top international law firm, and he left in Mexico. He was at the Mexico office. He left to become a notary public, because to him, being a notary public was better than just being a lawyer. So you're dealing with a whole profession of document authenticators, and in some cases those documents have to do with employment, and all of a sudden we're talking about electronic paperless offices. So yes, the technology gets out ahead of the law.
All right. Well, given that, and that you're saying that the law hasn't caught up so much with the ability or the technology enablement to do that, you and I are talking to people all over the world all the time about they're moving their organizations to paperless. So, in your opinion, are they doing it? If it's not for the law, are they doing it to be environmentally, smart? Are they doing it for compliance? What's the reason that everyone all of a sudden is going, oh my God, we got to get this stuff electronically?
Well, I mean, the drivers for electronic office, I think, are partly environmental. I love those emails that still say, "Please don't print," or think twice before printing this. But also just the cost of paper. You save paper, but I think, at least in the clients I see, because I'm dealing with multinationals, it's often literally the convenience and the expedience and almost the necessity in today's world of being able to look at documents around the world, and to have to be sending faxes, or at least making PDFs of things and transmitting documents by overnight courier doesn't make sense. It's just literally, in today's world, we do everything else on our computer, and if we're asking for some payroll documentation or a performance evaluation for some employee in our office in France or in China, to have to deal with paper is just much less inconvenient. And it also doesn't allow a lot of the stuff that companies like PeopleDoc do, aggregate information and track employees much quicker in real time, and you can't be doing that with paper. So I would say, from my observation, that probably the number one motivator is just business efficiency.
Do you see that the laws are going to be changing anytime soon? Do you think that it's going to require people to do this on a more aggressive basis? And, of course, we know that in Europe and some other areas, they're already ahead of us in the U.S., but in general, do you see that, the legal system is going to start to require this for all those reasons you just listed?
I don't know about require, because we're talking about, I mean, maybe in some cases, but generally speaking, the legislators, when they make law, they're not telling employers how to keep their filing systems. That's not something that governments get in the business of. Yes, laws are opening up and are more friendly to paperless executions of documents. But remember, by the way, documents, whether they're on paper or electronic, doesn't have much legal significance except for those that are signed by someone, because otherwise you could just keep all non-signed documents electronically, and if someone, for some reason or other, really wanted a paper copy, you could just hit print and print it. So the question is really about signatures and having an electronic version, either electronically attesting to things as opposed to signing with a wet ink pen, or keeping a PDF type image of a wet ink signature that's not the original. Those are really what the legal documents are. And yeah, the laws are moving in the right way. Here, as a visual aid, just in July 2014, this is a copy of the new regulation that the European Union put out. And this is not the first law from the European Union on electronic signatures, but this is called Regulation number 910/2014, July 2014, on electronic identification and trust services for electronic transmission in the internal market, and repealing the previous directive. So the point is, yes, the laws are looking at that stuff. That said, you've got the inertia of bureaucracy, and on that, let me give the example of if you're going to be terminating someone in Mexico or some of the Latin American countries. The law requires that you go down to the bureaucrat's office, the labor office, and you sign a release. If you need a release in Mexico when you're terminating an employee, paying the employee something, and you want the employee to sign a release that you can later enforce, if the employee later sues, the only way to get an enforceable release in Mexico is to walk down to the labor office and sign that document in front of the labor agent, and then they file it with the government. So whether laws will change in that regard is less clear, right? Because maybe that's just part of what labor agents do in Mexico, and they might have a vested political interest against changing that rule. But even there, those documents tend to be kept by the government, and that doesn't really affect your internal document recovery system, as long as you're just keeping a copy of the document, the original of which is with the government.
Okay, so the biggest question we get, and I'm sure it's one of the big questions you get too, is there's this kind of a little bit of fear in people's hearts about putting everything online, and particularly out in the cloud and all that security stuff, which we're not going to talk about today because we're focused on the legal issues. But I know every country, in some cases every state, have different laws what can and cannot be or shouldn't be held electronically. What's the kind of advice you give somebody at a high level, that they should be considering, putting this, what kind of documents, what kinds of things should they be putting online, and stop worrying about it from a legal perspective?
Well, the answer to the actual question, most of the legal advice I'm giving comes from the data protection countries that have what I call omnibus data protection laws, and those countries include all of the European Union, plus some countries that in the last 10 years pretty much copied the European Union's data protection law regime. The European Union is changing it now to a new regulation, but we've got countries like Israel and Hong Kong and Mexico and Argentina and others that have copied that regime. In those countries, there's laws around complying with that. But on the more kind of social side of the question about people's fear of all this electronic data, I guess we can all have our own opinion on it. One thought I had on that is that in some contexts, we feel more comfortable when data is electronic. And I thought of that just yesterday. I went in and I ran a credit card charge at a store to buy lunch, and they just took the image of my card, but they didn't give me any receipt. They said, do you need a receipt? I said, no. So there was absolutely no paper there. And, of course, some people on their phones can charge through their phone, and there's no paper generated. And if you think back to what it was when we were kids, you'd run a credit card, and they'd run it on a little machine and give in your whole credit card. This was before they would redact the first pieces of the credit card, and so there'd be a paper record with the merchant and a paper record in your pocket that you might toss in a waste paper basket, and somebody might pull out that has your whole credit card on there. Nowadays, we feel a lot more secure when there's no paper around a credit card transaction and it's only electronic. So I guess if people say they're scared of electronic data, I guess it's just a matter of the context and getting comfortable with it. And sometimes it's even more satisfying or less scary when it's electronic.
Well put. I agree. I think that maybe it's not just the electronic word, it's like the technology word. So I wonder, are you seeing trends in particular geographies? Are you seeing particular types of documents, I-9s versus performance reviews or things like that, that people tend to come up to you and say, look, legally we want to make sure we're doing the right thing to put this electronically into our system?
Well, the way I see that is, again, as a lawyer, when I'm asked these questions, I divide all documents into either they're signed, and at some point in the future, you might need to pull out that document and point to that signature and say, hey, pal, you agreed to this. If it's not signed, it can be electronic, and it's hard to imagine a scenario where you have to keep a paper version of some non-executed, non-signed document. So that eliminates lots of documents. But there's a few core documents that in almost all countries, local lawyers get really nervous if you talk about just imaging and destroying the paper. And those would be the employment contract and any separate restrictive covenant. Sometimes restrictive covenants are in the employment contract. Restrictive covenants, of course, are non-compete agreements or invention assignment agreements or confidentiality agreements. And then third would be a release when you terminate someone. In between, there's other stuff people sign. Employees sign along the way. They sign their payroll documents. They often sign attendance training logs to prove they got trained on whatever issue, and sometimes they sign acknowledgments to a handbook or a code of conduct. But the three important ones are going to be your original employment agreement, any separate restrictive covenant agreement, and a release. And those, as a general rule, speaking across countries, it's best to keep a hard copy of those. But, of course, the company can always image those and keep them as a PDF and just have some metal filing cabinet in some basement somewhere where they stick those originals. Because in court someday, if you're later, for example, need to sue someone on their restrictive covenant saying he violated his non-compete, and the best you can do is print up a PDF. In some countries, there's going to be technical arguments that that's not good enough. So that's why it's a good idea to save those. Although even in the U.S. and other countries, that's less of an issue. That's probably more of an issue in civil law countries. But I suppose I'd say those are the three that you'd want to think the hardest about before you completely went paperless and destroyed the originals. Excellent.
That's great. Well, the good news, bad news, I guess, is that we're out of time, Don. This is like such an interesting topic for me, and I'm sure many of the viewers that are tuning in. So I have a request for you. I would love to have you back talking more in detail about some of the signatures, wet, dry, and everything in between. And we can do a follow-on to this particular session that we did just today.
Great. It's very nice talking to you, and 10 minutes goes by in a flash. So thank you.
I know, poof, right? Luckily it's not billable time. Amen. So, for me. So, Don, I want to thank you so much for joining us and giving such really great information. It's a great conversation, and of course we're going to put your contact information on the slide in just a minute so viewers can contact you directly if they want to have more in-depth discussions, and certainly welcome that, of course. But I also want to thank our viewers for joining us and ask you if you are in Chicago or San Francisco or have colleagues that are in those areas and want to join us at our upcoming live events. We're going to have some great executive roundtables as we do them around the country. Chicago is December 9th. San Francisco is December 18th. You can get an invitation just by contacting us on our website, which is people-doc.com. Let us know that you're interested, and we would love to have you join us at one of those venues coming up soon. Also, check out some of the previous on-demand videos we've done. There are great ones out there, and of course, stay tuned for future ones that'll be coming up, including Part 2 with Don. So for People Doc and all your friends here, we say thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.